The Incredibles is a generational classic. Released at a moment when superhero stories were still finding their footing on screen, the film manages to still be a superhero story, but also a moving family adventure, a genre's deconstruction, and a surprisingly adult meditation on identity, labor, purpose, and resentment. Nearly every aspect of this film, its writing, pacing, visual narrative, and character work, are executed with surgical precision, making it not only a generational classic, but also perhaps Pixar's most ambitious and successful work to date. There is so much worth praising about The Incredibles, but today I want to narrow it down to one specific element: the antagonist of this children's movie, which I don't even know if you can call it a children's movie, because if you weren't already aware, The Incredibles is the only film in the Pixar catalog that has ever received a PG-13 rating.
You married Elastigirl? And got busy!
So today we're looking back at this era-defining film and going to psychoanalyze and perhaps over-intellectualize someone who is, in my opinion, one of the best written villains of all time. Unpacking the aspects of his story that makes him resonate so deeply as a character and as a villain, and taking a look back at some parts of his villainy and personality that you may have missed as a kid. Buddy Pine, better known as Syndrome, is not just a memorable villain, but one of the most compelling and disturbingly human antagonists of the 2000s. Syndrome is often remembered as a deeply unlikable and obnoxious know-it-all, petty, vengeful, and cruel. All of that is, in fact, true, but revisiting The Incredibles as an adult, you start to pick up on a few things that I don't think many kids would have been privy to. Also, if you can see the heating pad behind me, no, you can't. When we first meet Syndrome, he's not actually Syndrome yet. His name is Buddy Pine, an overexcited kid with a crooked, wide-toothed smile, showing off his own invention, desperate to prove himself to someone both he and the world idolize. This introduction does a remarkable amount of work in terms of storytelling in a very short amount of time, most notably through Buddy's character design. In my opinion, he is the picture of late 1950s all-American little boy. Bright ginger hair, freckles, ears that stick out a little too much, and wrapped in his handmade Incrediboy costume, which I believe, frankly, is a fantastic sidekick name. To his young, naive mind, the idea that his hero might not want him or might not need him doesn't even register. He is Mr. Incredible's self-proclaimed biggest fan, but he can't conceive of a world where his admiration isn't reciprocated or at least accepted, or where his talent, intelligence, and enthusiasm aren't enough merit to cement him as a useful sidekick or at least companion to this celebrity figure whom he idolizes. Something I noticed during my rewatch was this particular choice in the foundational scenes of the movie that sent me down, again, a psychoanalytic rabbit hole, which seems to be a pattern for me. From what I know about this time period, and no, I was not alive during it, I'm not that fucking old, I don't believe it was necessarily uncommon for kids to play outside on their own or without adult supervision. However, I do find it to be an interesting and maybe even intentional choice that our first introduction to Buddy is without adult supervision. He's on his own. There's no parents, no guardians, no one intervening on behalf of Buddy's unusual behavior. And yes, I know this was likely a choice that writers and animators made to keep the story pacing tight and succinct. Just humor me, okay? Let me have fun. In fact, our very first introduction to Buddy is a string of escalating red flags. He's an unattended minor that lacks basic situational awareness to the point where he gets into a stranger's car. Actually, no, strike that. He breaks into a stranger's car. He is stalking for what is, for all intents and purposes, a celebrity figure, trespassing, and entirely incapable of recognizing that what he's doing is not appropriate and illegal. Our very first introduction to this character cements the fact that he has little to no understanding of boundaries, and when those boundaries are first enforced, very physically and literally, bro literally gets ejected from this vehicle, and Mr. Incredible speeds off without him, and he's like, maybe I should go follow him. This moment isn't played for horror, but instead humor, but it's still deeply unsettling in retrospect. It establishes almost immediately that Buddy is naive and disillusioned. And he then escalates things even further by showing up to an active crime scene. A feat that requires him to fly up to the top of a skyscraper, something he treats as both completely normal and totally safe. This moment quietly establishes just how much faith he places in his own inventions, and how little regard he has for risk or consequence. Once again, he is actively stalking Mr. Incredible after receiving an unmistakable verbal and physical no. He inserts himself into this already very dangerous situation and makes things worse. By confronting what can only be described as a foreign terrorist, the man has bombs strapped all over him. His name is Bomb Voyage. His delusion is not just that he believes he belongs there, but that he has already been granted this based on the merit of his intelligence and his inventions. He is Mr. Incredible's sidekick, because obviously, despite every signal to the contrary. And this is the point where I really fell down the rabbit hole and decided I'm gonna make the most obnoxious video about this. Buddy is at most 10 or 12 years old here. You could give or take a couple years, but he is a child. And yet, based on what the film has shown us in the first 15 to 20 minutes of the movie, he has done all of these things on his own. Designed and constructed an entire costume fit to Mr. Incredible's current aesthetic and how his version of a sidekick to Mr. Incredible would be depicted. Engineered functional rocket boots in the 1950s. Memorized Mr. Incredible's fighting style and all of his moves, and embedded himself deeply into Mr. Incredible's fan club, noting himself to be his biggest fan. And all of this taken together, to me, signals a few things. First, Buddy is undeniably gifted and incredibly intelligent, especially for his age. He's innovative and technically capable far beyond his years. And secondly, Mr. Incredible is not just his hero, he's a hyperfixation. I'm not diagnosing him, but the behavior he's engaging in is undoubtedly a hyperfixation. He's fixated on Mr. Incredible. His life revolves around him. Even after repeated rejection, not once, not twice, but continuously, Buddy cannot accept the boundary being clearly and directly placed in front of him. Even as he's being physically restrained and pushed into a police car, he's not angry, he's not resentful. His response isn't fear, embarrassment, anger, or resentment. He just keeps insisting.
He's been doing.
I can help you! You're making a mistake!
He injured.
You mean he got away?
Well, yeah. Skippy here made sure of that.
Incredible!
You're not affiliated with me!
I think this little line gives us more insight into a distinct characteristic that Buddy displays at a young age, which then develops into something more evil and more villainous in the long run. And that's his entitlement. He has this belief that his brilliance, his preparation, and his devotion should earn him access, regardless of consent. And this is something that he repeats during the Bon Voyage scene. Once again, Buddy refuses to accept rejection at face value. Instead, he immediately jumps to a conclusion that I think exposes a deep insecurity for him. The fear that he isn't super enough, the fear that he isn't good enough. What's striking here is how rehearsed this response feels, as though he's already anticipated the moment and prepared for an argument in advance. He insists that not every superhero needs powers, and that his value lies in his intelligence, his preparation, and his ability to keep up. But then he follows that with a comparison. He doesn't just defend himself, he's elevating himself in comparison to Mr. Incredible. He points out that because of his rocket boots, he can fly, which is something that the hyper-masculine, most celebrated it guy superhero of their time can't do.
I invented these. I can fly. Can you fly?
Buddy is a child trying to negotiate his way into belonging. By reframing his perceived deficiency as someone who's not super as a superiority, he has something that other supers don't. He's desperate to prove that he deserves the place beside the person he idolizes the most. Buddy even throws Mr. Incredible's own advice back at him. He tells him that he's always saying people should be true to themselves, but never explains which part of themselves to be true to. And Buddy believes he's figured it out. He isn't trying to replace Mr. Incredible or stand above him. He wants to be his ward, his humble sidekick. I think it's interesting that at this point, Buddy doesn't crave dominance or notoriety or glory. He doesn't need to be the strongest or the most revered. What he wants is something far more simpler and far more human. To feel special, to feel useful, and to be in the company of somebody he looks up to. He isn't trying to usurp Mr. Incredible or be the next big thing, the next big superhero. But when that's denied, not just the recognition, but the companionship itself, when that's taken off the table, something within Buddy fractures, as with most typical villain origin stories do. That moment marks the beginning of his descent from gifted child superfan to vengeful egomaniac. Not because he was rejected as a hero, but because he was rejected as a person. He wanted to be seen and applauded for his dedication, intelligence, and ingenuity. He wanted to feel super too, but it didn't have to be in the way that his society views super. He just wanted to feel super. Lawrence J. Coleman and Tracy L. Cross identify giftedness itself as a stigmatizing condition. Being gifted inherently sets children apart from their peers, and that difference can interfere with full social acceptance. Giftedness accompanies a strange double bind. It can invite admiration or ridicule depending entirely on its context, audience, and timing. This tension was also observed by psychologist Letta Stetter Hollingworth, who noted that children with exceptionally high IQs frequently experienced adjustment difficulties. These struggles, she argued, stemmed not only from a lack of intellectual stimulation, but also from emotional neglect, particularly when parents or caregivers failed to recognize or adequately support the child's social and psychological needs. Notably, the research that I just referenced takes place from the 1940s to the 1960s. The exact cultural moment in time that The Incredibles is culturally and visually rooted in. So I think it's interesting that this isn't a modern framework that's being sort of superimposed onto this film or retroactively applied to the film. It's the actual direct world that Buddy is living in. These things were being researched and studied and starting to be more understood in this time frame. So with that knowledge, you kind of look at Buddy through a different lens. Buddy exists as an exceptionally gifted child in a time that lacks the language, awareness, or infrastructure to understand children like him. There's no framework for nurturing his intelligence without isolating him, no real social model for helping him integrate, and if the scene of Mr. Incredible putting him into the cop car saying to the cops, make sure his mother knows what he's been up to, is any indicator, Buddy has very little parental presence offering guidance, support, understanding, or nurturing his needs, intelligence, etc. In other words, he isn't just misunderstood by Mr. Incredible, but also likely, even though we don't see it on screen, you can likely assume that he's also feeling that same sort of alienation and lack of belonging in his everyday life. He was growing up in a culture and a society that was not yet equipped to support a child like him. And in that sense, his bitterness, entitlement, and fixation doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It's the byproduct of his brilliance without belonging. It's what happens when a child like him, his gifts are visible, but his needs are not met. Now switching gears to syndrome. There's a small but overlooked line that I realized while watching this as an adult that I think really crystallizes how realistic but still downright evil Buddy has become on his path to being syndrome. He casually drops this line when he's speaking to Mr. Incredible, but I think it's very telling and it almost takes you out of the film because it's so realistic that you forget you're watching a made-up kids movie.
Turns out there are a lot of people, whole countries, who want respect, and they will pay through the nose to get it. How do you think I got rich? I invented weapons.
Syndrome didn't just become wealthy through his innovation or regular old defense contracts. He amassed his fortune by designing and selling weapons to foreign governments. And who knows what they will use that for. His intelligence, which was once in the beginning of the movie framed as a desperate attempt for belonging, is now being weaponized in the most literal sense. And to me, the implications of that are so real world horrifying. Like, imagine if the most evil people you can think of, right? You think of people who have access to insane wealth, insane knowledge or intelligence, or insane people who work for them that give them power. And I'm speaking metaphorically here, although I'm sure a lot of you have some people who come to mind. But that stuff is so scary to me. Somebody having insane wealth, insane power, insane intelligence, and access to other very evil, morally corrupt people. The real world implications of this is that Syndrome's inventions could be used to kill people in places outside of the United States. And that is so real and poignantly like sad and twisted to me thinking about this movie that I watched as a kid. There's entire countries willing to pay through the nose to get this type of technology because they're going to use it for evil. It's just like I had to pause because it made me think of a lot of real world examples. Ultimately, he's learned that fear commands attention and respect more reliably than admiration does. That wealth, of course, funds more than just his cushy private island lifestyle. It bankrolls his superhero testing facility, a space engineered with chilling efficiency to serve multiple purposes at once. First, it systematically eliminates the threat of having to compete with every last living superhero that is still wanting to relive the glory days when being super wasn't outlawed. And second, it functions as a perfect way to get revenge. It's a slow, calculated purge of everyone that he deems as now beneath him because they were super when he wasn't, but now he's super on his own, and eventually at the one hero who hurt him the most. All of this clears the path for the final act of his plan, releasing his monstrous invention to the public so that only he can stop it. The spectacle is the point. The danger is manufactured so that he can look like a hero. In saving the day, Syndrome would finally affirm his distorted sense of self-worth that he has had since a child, prior to Mr. Incredible even rejecting him. That has been there. That is clearly there. And we can tell because of that line that he has in the beginning where he says, like, is it because I'm not super? Like, he already anticipated that that was going to be Mr. Incredible's response, and not that, like, no, you're a kid and you're stalking me and you're putting all of us in this situation in danger, but whatever. But he wants to bathe in the applause and the praise that he was never afforded since a child. He feels underappreciated, but he knows he's intelligent and he knows he's capable. And the irony is that as powerful and as lauded and loved as Mr. Incredible once was, he's likely not as book smart or on paper as intelligent as Syndrome. So Syndrome beats him out even as a child. But he can't see that. And he explains that when he's old and, quote, had his fun, he'll sell his inventions so that everybody knows the famous line.
Everyone can be super. And when everyone's super, no one will be.
Which I think sums up the cruel irony at the heart of this movie. The Incredibles is not a superhero movie. I think it's much deeper than that, much more than that. The Incredibles is a movie about a gifted child, a cautionary tale about when a gifted child, a child with different needs, a child who has incredible amount of potential if harnessed correctly, who only ever wants to just feel special, grows up into a man who is determined to erase the very concept of being special itself. Like, think about that. He literally says, and when everyone's super, no one will be. But isn't that the whole point? Like, Buddy as a child was so desperate for Mr. Incredible's attention and affection and admiration. And like I said, he didn't want to beat Mr. Incredible. He didn't want to usurp him. He didn't want to be even number one. He was happy with being number two. He was happy with being a sidekick because that's what would make him feel special. That's what would make him feel useful and wanted. I think it's a very interesting sub-theme, perhaps is the right term, that this movie is more than just a fun superhero adventure where the good family saves the day and all these other lessons that they learn along the way. But I also think it's a perfect example of a proper villain origin story of how real everyday people can turn evil. And I think I'm gonna stop it there because it's New Year's Eve. And yes, I am wearing a Santa shirt. It's New Year's Eve and I got things to do and places to go, and I put off filming this video because of the holidays. But I am very excited for 2026 and to see what this channel can do in the new year. And also, if you're a mobile user, I'm now eligible for hypes. I think you only have to be on the mobile app to do the hype, and it only lasts for the first week of this video being up. So please hype this video. That would be really great. It helps small channels, and I will see you all in 2026.